Dr. Elizabeth Brennan had seen many strange things in her 20 years practicing medicine in rural Pennsylvania. But nothing had prepared her for the letter that arrived on a cold November morning in 1867. Dr. Brennan. *I am writing to you in desperation. My son, Anthony, is 7 years old. He speaks 6 languages fluently. He has memorized entire medical textbooks just from hearing me read them aloud once. He can perform mathematical calculations that trained mathematicians cannot solve. But the local townspeople say he is possessed by demons. They want to take him away. Please, I beg you, come examine him. Prove to them that he is not evil, just different. Dr. James Caldwell. Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Elizabeth read the letter 3 times. She'd heard of child prodigies before, gifted children with remarkable abilities. But what Dr. Caldwell described seemed impossible. No 7-year-old, no matter how bright, could truly master 6 languages or solve advanced mathematics. It had to be exaggeration. A father's pride making a smart child seem extraordinary. Still, something in the letter's desperate tone moved her. And the mention of demon possession troubled her deeply. She'd seen too many people harmed by superstition masquerading as religious fervor. She wrote back immediately, agreeing to visit. Millbrook was a tiny farming community nestled in the Allegheny Mountains, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business and strangers were viewed with suspicion. Elizabeth arrived on a gray December afternoon, her medical bag in hand and her credentials from the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania carefully folded in her coat pocket. She'd need those credentials. In 1867, female doctors were still a rarity, especially in rural areas. People didn't trust them. Didn't believe women had the intelligence or temperament for medicine. Elizabeth had spent her career proving them wrong. Dr. James Caldwell's house was a modest 2-story structure on the edge of town. James himself answered the door, and Elizabeth was struck by how exhausted he looked. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly as he shook hers. "Dr. Brennan, thank God you've come. I didn't know if you would. Your letter was quite compelling, Dr. Caldwell. Where is Anthony?" "In the study. I should warn you, he can be overwhelming at first. The way he speaks, the things he knows, it's unsettling even for me, and I'm his father." James led her through the house to a small study lined with medical books and journals. And there, sitting at a desk far too large for him, was a small boy with the most remarkable eyes Elizabeth had ever seen. They were bright blue, but it wasn't the color that struck her. It was the intelligence behind them. The awareness. When Anthony looked up at her, she felt as if she were being examined by someone far older than 7. "You're Dr. Elizabeth Brennan," the boy said in a clear, precise voice. "You graduated from the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania in 1847. You wrote a paper on childbed fever that was published in the Medical and Surgical Reporter. You theorized that the disease was transmitted by doctors who failed to wash their hands between patients, a conclusion you reached independently before Dr. Semmelweis's work became widely known." Elizabeth froze. Everything he'd said was true. But how could he possibly know it? "How do you know about my work?" she asked carefully. "Father subscribed to the Medical and Surgical Reporter. I read your paper when I was 5. It was brilliant, by the way. Your methodology was sound, and your conclusions were correct, even if the medical establishment dismissed them because you're a woman." He said this matter-of-factly, without emotion, as if he were discussing the weather. "Anthony," James said quietly. "Dr. Brennan is here to examine you. To help us. I know why she's here. The townspeople think I'm possessed. They want to drive out the demons they believe live in my head." Anthony looked directly at Elizabeth. "You don't believe in demons, do you, Dr. Brennan?" "No, I don't." "Good. Then perhaps you can explain to them that I'm not evil. Just different." Elizabeth pulled up a chair and sat across from the boy. Anthony, your father says you can speak 6 languages. Is that true? 7, actually. I learned Russian last month from a book father brought home. Anthony switched seamlessly to French. Would you like me to demonstrate? Je peux parler français, allemand, Italian, espagnol, Latin, grec ancien, et russe. Elizabeth, who spoke French herself, was stunned. His pronunciation was perfect, his grammar flawless. This wasn't a child parroting phrases he'd memorized. This was genuine fluency. How did you learn all these languages? She asked. I read the grammar books and dictionaries father has in his library. Once I understand the rules of a language, the rest is just vocabulary. I remember everything I read. Everything. Everything. I have what some people call a photographic memory. I see a page once, and I can recall it perfectly forever. Books, maps, mathematical formulas, faces, conversations. It all stays in my mind, organized and accessible. Elizabeth had heard of people with exceptional memories, but this seemed beyond even that. Can you demonstrate? Anthony gestured to the bookshelf. Pick any medical textbook. Open it to any page. Read me one paragraph, and I'll recite it back to you word for word. Elizabeth selected Gray's Anatomy, a thick volume she knew well. She opened it randomly to a page about the cardiovascular system and read a dense, technical paragraph about blood circulation. Anthony listened with perfect attention. When she finished, he closed his eyes and recited the entire paragraph without a single error. Not just the main points, but every word, every comma, every detail. That's remarkable, Elizabeth breathed. It's also why the townspeople are afraid of me, Anthony said, opening his eyes. I make adults feel stupid. I answer questions they can't answer. I solve problems they don't understand. And when people encounter something they can't explain, they call it evil. When did your abilities first become apparent? I spoke my first complete sentence at 8 months old. I was reading by age 2. By 3, I'd memorized most of Father's medical library. By 5, I was helping him diagnose patients based on their symptoms. Anthony's voice remained emotionless, clinical. Father tried to hide how different I was, but in a small town, you can't hide anything for long. James cleared his throat. At first, people were impressed. They called him a miracle child, a gift from God. But as he got older, as his knowledge grew beyond what any child should possess, he trailed off. They started to fear him. Started whispering about unnatural intelligence, about deals with the devil. 3 weeks ago, Anthony continued, Reverend Matthias gave a sermon about false prophets and demonic possession. He said that no child could possess such knowledge unless they'd been touched by Satan. He called for the community to cleanse me. Elizabeth felt cold fury building in her chest. Cleanse you how? Exorcism. Possibly imprisonment in an asylum. Reverend Matthias hasn't been specific, but the message is clear. Either I become normal, or I disappear. You're not possessed, Anthony. You're what we call a savant. Someone whose brain works differently, allowing for extraordinary abilities in certain areas. I know what I am, Dr. Brennan. The question is, can you convince them? Anthony looked at her with those penetrating eyes. Because if you can't, Father has decided to take me away. To leave everything we know and start over somewhere else. But I don't want that. This is our home. These are our people. They shouldn't force us to leave just because they're afraid of something they don't understand. Elizabeth looked at James, who nodded sadly. I've already made preparations. We can leave within a week if necessary. Go west, maybe to California, start a new practice there. But it will destroy us financially. And more than that, it means letting fear and superstition win. Then we won't let it win, Elizabeth said firmly. I'll examine Anthony thoroughly. I'll document his abilities scientifically. And I'll present my findings to the town council and Reverend Matthias. I'll make them understand that Anthony is not possessed, he's exceptional. And there's nothing evil about that. You don't know these people, James warned. They've already made up their minds. Then I'll change their minds. Elizabeth stood, her resolve hardening. I didn't become a doctor to back down from ignorance and fear. If they want to condemn this child, they'll have to go through me first. Anthony studied her for a moment, then smiled. It was the first genuine emotion she'd seen from him. You're brave, Dr. Brennan. Foolish perhaps, but brave. I appreciate that. I'm practical, Anthony. And practically speaking, losing a mind like yours would be a tragedy for science and humanity. So I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen. Elizabeth spent the next 3 days conducting the most thorough examination of her career. She tested Anthony's memory, his linguistic abilities, his mathematical skills. She measured his physical development, checked his reflexes, examined his eyes and ears. Physically, Anthony was a normal 7-year-old boy. Slightly underweight, perhaps, but healthy. Mentally, he was unlike anyone Elizabeth had ever encountered. She watched him solve calculus problems that would stump university professors. She listened as he conversed in Latin with her, discussing ancient Roman medical practices with the ease of a scholar. She presented him with medical cases, and he diagnosed them with accuracy that made her question her own years of training. But more than his abilities, what struck Elizabeth was his isolation. Anthony had no friends. The other children avoided him, frightened by his strangeness. Adults were uncomfortable around him, unsettled by a child who could quote Hippocrates in Greek and discuss anatomy with clinical precision. He spent his days alone in his father's study, reading, learning, growing ever more knowledgeable and ever more lonely. On the third evening, as Elizabeth was packing her equipment, Anthony asked her a question. Dr. Brennan, do you think I'll ever be normal? Elizabeth paused. What is normal, Anthony? Having friends. Playing games. Not making everyone around me uncomfortable. His voice, usually so controlled, wavered slightly. I don't want to be alone anymore. But I don't know how to be anything other than what I am. Elizabeth sat down beside him. Anthony, being exceptional often means being lonely. People fear what they don't understand, and they definitely don't understand you. But that doesn't mean you should try to hide who you are or diminish your abilities to make others comfortable. Then what should I do? You should find people who appreciate your mind rather than fear it. Scientists, scholars, other people who value knowledge and discovery. They exist, Anthony. Not in Millbrook, perhaps, but out there in the world. Father wants to go west. Start over. Would that make you happy? Anthony thought carefully before answering. I don't know what would make me happy. I've never been happy. I've been curious, interested, fascinated by learning. But happy? I'm not sure I understand what that feels like. Elizabeth's heart ached for this brilliant, lonely child. Then we'll have to teach you. Starting with making sure you're safe here, in your own home, with your own father. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with the town council. I'm going to show them exactly what you are. And if they still want to call you possessed after that, then they're beyond reason. Most people are beyond reason, Dr. Brennan. Emotions guide them far more than logic or evidence. Perhaps. But I have to try. For you, and for every other child who's different, who doesn't fit the mold society expects. Anthony looked at her with those remarkable eyes. Thank you for caring. Not many people do. Then they're fools, Elizabeth said simply. The next morning, Elizabeth stood before the Millbrook Town Council in the small courthouse that served as the center of local government. 5 men sat behind a long table, their faces already set with skepticism. Reverend Matthias sat to the side, his expression stern and unforgiving. Elizabeth had dressed in her most professional attire, her medical credentials prominently displayed. She prepared a detailed report on her examination of Anthony, complete with scientific terminology and careful documentation. "Gentlemen," she began, "I've spent 3 days conducting a thorough medical and psychological examination of Anthony Caldwell. My findings are conclusive. The boy is not possessed, nor is he touched by any supernatural force. He is what medical science calls a savant, an individual with extraordinary cognitive abilities that exceed normal human capacity." "That's exactly what demonic possession looks like," Reverend Matthias interrupted. "Unnatural abilities, knowledge beyond what any child should possess. It's not unnatural, it's exceptional. Anthony's brain processes and retains information in ways that most people cannot. It's a biological difference, not a spiritual corruption." One of the councilmen, a farmer named Hoskins, leaned forward. "How do you explain a 7-year-old knowing things that grown men don't know? Things he couldn't possibly have learned? He learned them by reading. Anthony has perfect memory recall. He reads something once, and he remembers it forever. Combined with his ability to understand complex concepts quickly, he's accumulated knowledge far beyond his years." "No child can do that," another councilman said flatly. "It's unnatural. It's rare, but not unnatural. Medical literature documents several cases of individuals with similar abilities. I can provide you with references." "We don't need references from your fancy medical books," Reverend Matthias said. "We need to protect this community from evil. That boy makes people uncomfortable. He knows things he shouldn't know. He speaks in ways no child should speak. That's the work of the devil." Elizabeth felt her temper rising but forced herself to stay calm. "Reverend, discomfort is not evidence of evil. Anthony makes people uncomfortable because he challenges their assumptions about what children can do. But that doesn't make him dangerous. Doesn't it?" Reverend Matthias stood, his voice rising. "What happens when he grows older, when his powers grow stronger? What happens when he uses his unnatural knowledge to manipulate and control others? What happens is the world gains a brilliant mind that could advance medical science, mathematics, or any field he chooses to pursue," Elizabeth shot back. "You're so afraid of what he is that you can't see the potential for good." "I see a threat to the natural order," Matthias said. "God gives us the intelligence we need, no more, no less. This boy has gone beyond what God intended. That makes him an abomination." The room erupted in argument. The councilmen talked over each other, some agreeing with Matthias, others expressing doubt. Elizabeth tried to speak, to present her evidence, but her voice was drowned out. Finally, the head councilman, Mayor Thornton, banged his gavel for silence. "Dr. Brennan, we appreciate your examination. But I'm afraid your conclusions don't address the real issue. This town is divided. Half the people are terrified of the Caldwell boy. They don't sleep well knowing he's here. Whether you call it possession or something else, the result is the same. This community is in turmoil. So you're going to exile a child because people are afraid?" Elizabeth said incredulously. "We're going to do what's best for the community as a whole," Thornton said. "And right now, that means Dr. Caldwell and his son need to leave Millbrook. This is madness." "This is democracy," Thornton said coldly. "The majority has spoken. The Caldwells have 1 week to settle their affairs and depart." Elizabeth looked around the room at these men who just condemned a child for the crime of being too intelligent. She saw fear in their eyes, yes, but also something worse. Relief. They were relieved to have an excuse to remove something that made them feel inadequate. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "Anthony Caldwell could have brought recognition to this town. Instead, you're driving away brilliance because it threatens your comfortable ignorance." "That's enough, Dr. Brennan," Thornton said. "Unless you plan to stay and continue practicing medicine here, your opinion on Millbrook's affairs doesn't matter. This meeting is adjourned." Elizabeth left the courthouse, furious and heartbroken. She'd failed. Despite her credentials, her evidence, her passion, she'd failed to protect Anthony. But as she walked back to the Caldwell house, a new resolve began to form. If Millbrook wouldn't protect Anthony, she would. And she had an idea how. Dr. James Caldwell took the news with quiet resignation, as if he'd expected nothing else. "I knew it was hopeless," he said, slumping into a chair in his study. "This town made up its mind weeks ago. Your examination, your credentials, they never had a chance against fear." "I'm sorry," Elizabeth said. "I truly thought rational evidence would prevail." "Reason rarely prevails over emotion, Dr. Brennan. You should know that by now." Anthony sat at his desk, watching the adults with that unervingly mature gaze. "So we're leaving. Going west, like you planned." "We are," James confirmed. "I've already received a response from a colleague in San Francisco. He can help me establish a practice there. It's not ideal, but—" "I have another proposal," Elizabeth interrupted. "One that might be better for everyone involved." Both Caldwells looked at her. "Come to Philadelphia," Elizabeth said. "I have connections at the Women's Medical College, at the Academy of Natural Sciences, at the University of Pennsylvania. There are people there, scientists and scholars, who would be fascinated by Anthony's abilities. Not frightened, fascinated. They could study him, help us understand how his mind works. And more importantly, they could educate him properly." "Anthony already educates himself," James said. "Through books, yes. But what about interaction with other brilliant minds? What about exposure to laboratories, lectures, experiments? Philadelphia has resources that Millbrook and even San Francisco can't match. Resources that could help Anthony reach his full potential." James looked skeptical. "We can't afford that kind of life, Dr. Brennan. I'm a country doctor, not a wealthy man. You wouldn't need to be. I have a proposal." Elizabeth took a deep breath, knowing what she was about to suggest would change her life irrevocably. "Come work with me. I've been trying to establish a clinic for poor families in Philadelphia for years, but I need another doctor to make it viable. We could be partners. And Anthony could attend the best schools, meet the best minds, have opportunities he'd never have in a frontier town." "Why would you do this for us?" James asked quietly. "Because in 20 years of practice, I've never encountered a mind like Anthony's. Because letting that mind wither in isolation would be a crime against knowledge itself. And because—" Elizabeth paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because I know what it's like to be different. To have abilities that society fears or dismisses. I became a doctor when everyone said women couldn't. I've spent my career fighting for respect, for recognition, for the simple right to practice my profession. I see that same fight in Anthony's future. The difference is, he doesn't have to fight alone." Anthony spoke up for the first time. "You want to study me. Like a specimen. I want to understand you. There's a difference. A specimen is passive, something to be examined and catalogued. I want to work with you, learn from you, help you develop your abilities while protecting you from those who would exploit or harm you." "What's the catch?" Anthony asked bluntly. "People don't make offers like this without wanting something in return." Elizabeth smiled despite herself. 7 years old and already cynical about human nature. "The catch is that I'll document my observations. I'll write papers about your cognitive abilities, your memory, your learning patterns. With your permission, I'll share what I learn with other scientists. Not to make you a circus attraction, but to advance our understanding of the human mind. You want to make me famous. I want to make what you represent understood. Right now, children like you are called possessed, evil, unnatural. But if I can show the scientific community what you're capable of, if I can demonstrate that exceptional intelligence is a natural phenomenon that should be nurtured rather than feared, maybe future children with your gifts won't have to flee their homes." James looked at his son. "What do you think, Anthony?" Anthony was quiet for a long moment, his brilliant mind clearly weighing options and calculating probabilities. Finally, he said, Philadelphia has better libraries than San Francisco. Better universities. More opportunities to learn from experts in different fields. From a purely practical standpoint, Dr. Brennan's offer is superior. That's not what I asked. Will you be happy there? I've never been happy anywhere, Father. But at least in Philadelphia, I might be useful. My abilities might actually benefit someone beyond just satisfying my own curiosity. Elizabeth felt a pang of sorrow at the resignation in his voice. This child had already accepted that happiness wasn't meant for people like him. All he could hope for was purpose. Then we'll go to Philadelphia, James decided. Dr. Brennan, we accept your offer. With one condition. Name it. Anthony's welfare comes first. Always. If your studies or your colleagues' interest in him ever becomes harmful to his mental or emotional health, we stop immediately. I won't sacrifice my son's well-being for science. Agreed, Elizabeth said without hesitation. His welfare is my primary concern. Everything else is secondary. They shook hands on it. Within the week, the Caldwells had packed their belongings and said goodbye to Millbrook. The townspeople watched them leave with visible relief, as if a dark cloud was being lifted from their community. Elizabeth watched too, and she made a silent vow. She would prove them all wrong. She would show that Anthony Caldwell wasn't a curse or a demon, but a gift. A remarkable human being whose mind could change the world, if only someone was brave enough to let it. Philadelphia in December 1867 was a bustling city of nearly 700,000 people, a stark contrast to rural Millbrook. The streets were crowded with carriages, vendors, and pedestrians. Factories belched smoke into the winter sky. The noise was constant and overwhelming. Anthony stood on the dock after their ship arrived, taking it all in with those intense eyes. Too loud, he said simply. You'll get used to it, Elizabeth assured him. She'd arranged lodgings for the Caldwells in a modest boarding house near her own residence. It wasn't luxurious, but it was respectable and affordable. Over the next few weeks, Elizabeth introduced James to potential patients and helped him begin building a practice. She also introduced Anthony to her colleagues at the Academy of Natural Sciences. Their reactions were exactly what she'd hoped for. Dr. Samuel Morton, a renowned anatomist, spent 3 hours testing Anthony's memory and knowledge of human anatomy. He emerged from the session pale and shaken. That child knows more about the cardiovascular system than most medical students, Morton told Elizabeth. He corrected 2 errors in my own understanding of blood flow. At 7 years old. Professor James Leidy, a parasitologist and expert in extinct species, engaged Anthony in a discussion about dinosaur fossils. Anthony had read every available paper on paleontology and could discuss the latest theories with the expertise of a seasoned researcher. Remarkable, Leidy kept saying. Absolutely remarkable. But not everyone was impressed. Some of Elizabeth's colleagues were skeptical, suggesting that Anthony was simply parroting information without true understanding. Others were uncomfortable with the whole situation, believing that studying a child in this way was exploitative. And then there was Dr. Nathan Cross. Cross was a physician and amateur psychologist who'd made a name for himself studying mental abnormalities. He was in his 50s, wealthy, and absolutely certain of his own brilliance. He cornered Elizabeth at an academy meeting in January. Dr. Brennan, I've been hearing fascinating things about your young prodigy. I'd very much like to examine him myself. Anthony is not a circus act, Dr. Cross. He's a child who deserves respect and privacy. Of course, of course. But surely you see the scientific value in studying him? Think of what we could learn about the nature of intelligence, memory, cognition. He could advance our understanding by decades. He's already contributing to that understanding through his interactions with qualified researchers who treat him with dignity. Cross's expression hardened. I am a qualified researcher, Dr. Brennan. Perhaps more qualified than a female doctor whose credentials are still questioned by many in the medical establishment. Elizabeth felt anger flash through her. My credentials are from the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, a fully accredited institution. I've practiced medicine for 20 years. I don't need your approval of my qualifications. And yet you're protective of this boy. Keeping him from researchers who might actually be able to help him. I'm protecting him from people who see him as a specimen rather than a human being. Cross smiled coldly. We'll see about that, Dr. Brennan. Philadelphia's scientific community is very interested in young Anthony. And I don't think you can keep him hidden forever. The conversation troubled Elizabeth. Cross was powerful and well-connected. If he decided to make Anthony's case a crusade, he could cause serious problems. Her fears were confirmed 2 weeks later when Cross published an article in the Medical and Surgical Reporter titled, "The Case of Unnatural Intelligence, Examining the Phenomenon of Precocious Knowledge." In it, Cross argued that Anthony Caldwell represented a dangerous anomaly that needed to be studied under controlled conditions. He suggested that such extreme intelligence might be a form of mental illness, a deviation from normal human development that could have unpredictable consequences. He called for Anthony to be institutionalized for observation and study. The article caused a sensation. Newspapers picked up the story. Suddenly, everyone in Philadelphia was talking about the boy genius and whether he represented a scientific marvel or a psychiatric case. People began showing up at the Caldwell's boarding house, hoping to catch a glimpse of Anthony. Some were curious scientists. Others were sensation seekers. A few were religious zealots who echoed Reverend Matthias's claims of demonic possession. James and Anthony became prisoners in their own home. This was a mistake, James told Elizabeth one evening as they watched a small crowd gather outside the boarding house. I thought Philadelphia would be different. That educated people would understand. But they're just as afraid as the people in Millbrook. They just hide it behind scientific language. Not all of them, Elizabeth argued. Dr. Morton, Professor Leidy, many others have been supportive and respectful. A handful of supporters against a tide of curiosity and fear. Dr. Cross is winning, Elizabeth. He's turned Anthony into a spectacle. Anthony sat in a corner of the room, reading a medical journal, apparently ignoring the conversation. But Elizabeth knew he was listening to every word. We won't let Cross win, Elizabeth said firmly. I'll publish a response to his article. I'll present our findings to the Academy. I'll show everyone that Anthony is not ill or dangerous, just exceptional. And if that doesn't work? Elizabeth didn't have an answer. That night, as she walked home through the cold Philadelphia streets, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. She'd promised the Caldwells safety, opportunity, a chance for Anthony to thrive. Instead, she'd brought them to a city where they were under siege from a different kind of ignorance. Scientific ignorance was in some ways worse than religious fear. At least Reverend Matthias had been honest about his superstition. Dr. Cross hid his fear and ambition behind the language of research and progress. Elizabeth reached her small townhouse and unlocked the door, exhausted and discouraged. Inside, she found a letter that had been slipped under her door. It was from Dr. Cross. Dr. Brennan. *I am prepared to offer you and Dr. Caldwell a substantial sum in exchange for permission to study young Anthony under controlled conditions at my private research facility. The boy would be well cared for, and his father could visit regularly. This arrangement would benefit everyone involved and would greatly advance scientific understanding. If you refuse, I am prepared to petition the court to have Anthony declared a ward of the state on grounds of potential mental instability. I have several colleagues who will testify that his condition requires professional supervision. I await your response. Dr. Nathan Cross. Elizabeth crumpled the letter in her fist, fury and fear warring in her chest. Cross was threatening to take Anthony away by force if they didn't cooperate willingly. And he probably had the power to do it. Elizabeth called an emergency meeting with James Caldwell and 3 of her most trusted colleagues, Dr. Samuel Morton, Professor James Leidy, and Dr. Anna Brummel, a fellow graduate of the Women's Medical College who specialized in children's health. They gathered in Elizabeth's parlor, the crumpled letter from Dr. Cross on the table between them. "This is extortion," Dr. Brummel said bluntly. "Cross has no legal grounds to declare Anthony mentally unstable." "Legal grounds don't matter if he can find a judge who'll listen," Elizabeth countered. "Cross is wealthy and well-connected. He'll shop around until he finds someone willing to sign the commitment papers. Then we fight him in court," Morton said. "We present evidence that Anthony is mentally sound, that he's not a danger to himself or others." "Court battles take months," James said quietly. "And in the meantime, Anthony would likely be placed in an institution pending the outcome. Do you have any idea what that would do to him? He's already isolated and struggling. Being locked up would destroy him." Anthony had been sitting silently in the corner, listening. Now he spoke up. "Dr. Cross wants to study me because he thinks I'm an anomaly. A freak of nature. If I let him examine me voluntarily, give him enough data to publish his papers and satisfy his curiosity, would he leave us alone?" "Absolutely not," Elizabeth said firmly. "Once you give him access, he'll never stop. He'll keep finding new tests, new experiments, new ways to justify keeping you under observation. Men like Cross don't stop when they get what they want. They just want more." "Then what do we do?" Anthony asked. His voice was calm, but Elizabeth could see the fear in his eyes. For all his intelligence, he was still a 7-year-old child facing threats he couldn't fully understand. Professor Leidy cleared his throat. "What if we preempt Cross? Publish our own comprehensive study of Anthony before he can? If we present our findings to the American Philosophical Society, to the Academy of Natural Sciences, to every major scientific institution, we establish the narrative before Cross can poison it." "That could work," Dr. Brummel said thoughtfully. "If we show that Anthony is a natural phenomenon, a beneficial variation in human cognition, it undercuts Cross's argument that he's dangerous or ill." "It also makes Anthony even more of a public spectacle," James objected. "Right now, Cross is the only one actively pursuing him. If we publish widely, we'll attract attention from everyone." "But it would be the right kind of attention," Elizabeth argued. "Instead of fear and suspicion, we'd be fostering scientific interest and support. We'd be creating a community of researchers who want to protect Anthony, not exploit him." James looked at his son. "Anthony, it's your life. Your choice. Do we fight Cross publicly, or do we run again? Find somewhere remote where no one knows us." Anthony thought for a long moment. "If we run, we'll always be running. There will always be another Reverend Matthias, another Dr. Cross. People who fear what they don't understand or want to control it for their own purposes." He looked around at the assembled adults. "I don't want to spend my life hiding. I want to be useful. If sharing what I am with the world means other children like me don't have to be afraid, then it's worth it." Elizabeth felt tears sting her eyes. This child had more courage than most adults she knew. "Then we fight," she said. "We publish, we present, and we make sure the world sees Anthony Caldwell for what he really is. Not a freak or a danger, but a gift." Over the next 2 weeks, they worked frantically to compile their findings. Elizabeth documented every test she'd conducted, every observation she'd made. Dr. Morton contributed anatomical measurements and cognitive assessments. Professor Leidy provided evaluations of Anthony's reasoning and problem-solving abilities. Dr. Brummel conducted extensive interviews with Anthony about his emotional state, his social development, his understanding of himself and the world. What emerged was a comprehensive portrait of an extraordinary mind housed in an otherwise ordinary child's body. Anthony wasn't superhuman or supernatural. He was simply at the far end of the human spectrum for intelligence and memory, the way some people were at the far end for height or artistic talent. They titled their paper, "A Study in Exceptional Cognition, The Case of Anthony Caldwell." Elizabeth presented it to the American Philosophical Society on February 15, 1868. The auditorium was packed. Word had spread about the boy genius, and everyone wanted to hear the evidence. Dr. Cross sat in the front row, his expression skeptical and hostile. Elizabeth stood at the podium, her heart pounding. This was it. The moment that would determine Anthony's future. "Gentlemen," she began, "I present to you the most remarkable mind I have encountered in 20 years of medical practice. Not a demon, not a disease, not a danger, but a natural variation in human cognition that deserves our wonder and protection." She presented their findings methodically, using scientific language and careful documentation. She showed test results, memory assessments, cognitive evaluations. She let the data speak for itself. Then she did something risky. She brought Anthony to the podium. "This is Anthony Caldwell," she said. "He has agreed to answer your questions directly, so you can judge for yourselves whether he is ill or exceptional." Anthony stood beside her, small and calm, facing an auditorium full of America's leading scientists and scholars. The questions came fast. "What is the square root of 4,761? 69, Anthony answered immediately. "Recite the first chapter of Gray's Anatomy." Anthony did so, word for word, without hesitation. "Explain the theory of natural selection as proposed by Charles Darwin." Anthony launched into a clear, comprehensive explanation that demonstrated not just memorization but genuine understanding of complex scientific concepts. For an hour, the audience peppered him with questions from mathematics, medicine, literature, history, and philosophy. Anthony answered every single one with accuracy and insight that left seasoned scholars speechless. Finally, Dr. Cross stood. "Young man," he said in a patronizing tone, "you've demonstrated impressive memorization. But can you create? Can you produce original thought, or do you simply regurgitate what others have written?" It was a calculated attack. Cross was suggesting that Anthony was nothing more than a human filing cabinet, impressive but ultimately limited. Anthony looked at Cross for a long moment. Then he said, "Dr. Cross, you published a paper last year on the treatment of melancholia. In it, you recommended bloodletting and mercury treatments. Based on recent research from European physicians and my own analysis of patient outcomes documented in medical journals, your approach is not only ineffective but actively harmful. The correlation between mercury treatment and patient deterioration is statistically significant. Your methods are causing more harm than good, yet you continue to recommend them. So I would ask you, sir, which of us is truly limited in our thinking? The child who synthesizes new information to reach better conclusions, or the established doctor who clings to disproven methods because admitting error would damage his reputation?" The auditorium erupted. Some people gasped. Others laughed. Dr. Cross's face turned bright red. "How dare you," he started. "How dare I what?" Anthony interrupted. "Point out that your pride is causing patients to suffer. That your need to be right is more important to you than actual healing. You called me here to prove I could think originally. I'm thinking originally. I'm thinking that the medical establishment needs to be challenged when it prioritizes tradition over evidence. And I'm thinking that men like you are more dangerous to progress than any number of exceptional children." The crowd was divided now. Some were nodding in agreement. Others looked scandalized that a child would speak to a respected doctor this way. Elizabeth wanted to intervene, to protect Anthony from the backlash she knew was coming. But she also realized that this was exactly what needed to happen. Anthony wasn't just demonstrating his intelligence. He was demonstrating his humanity. His ability to feel frustration, to stand up for what he believed was right, to challenge authority when authority was wrong. Dr. Cross sputtered for a moment, then sat down without responding. The president of the Philosophical Society, Dr. William Parker, stood. "Dr. Brennan, members of the society, I believe we have seen enough. This child is clearly exceptional, but not in any way that suggests mental illness or instability. I recommend we reject any calls for involuntary institutionalization and instead work to ensure young Mr. Caldwell has access to the best educational resources our city can provide." The vote was overwhelming. Only 3 members dissented, and Dr. Cross was one of them. Elizabeth felt relief wash over her. They'd won. For now. But the battle wasn't over. 3 days later, Dr. Cross published a scathing response in the Medical and Surgical Reporter, calling the Philosophical Society's decision a travesty. He claimed that Anthony was clearly mentally unbalanced, that his outburst during the presentation proved he was dangerous and unstable. He renewed his call for institutionalization. This time, he found more support. Several conservative physicians agreed with him, arguing that children should be obedient and respectful, not challenging established authorities. They suggested that Anthony's intelligence made him arrogant and potentially dangerous. The controversy escalated. Newspapers ran editorials arguing both sides. Some praised Anthony as a marvel. Others condemned him as a disrespectful, unnatural child who needed to be controlled. The Caldwell family received threats. Protesters gathered outside their boarding house. Someone threw a rock through their window. "This is getting out of hand," James said, cleaning up broken glass while Anthony sat on his bed, reading as if nothing was wrong. "Elizabeth, we can't live like this. Anthony can't grow up under siege." "I know. I'm working on it." Elizabeth had been reaching out to her network, looking for allies, for solutions. And she'd found one, though it would require a sacrifice. "I've been offered a position at the Women's Medical College," she told James and Anthony that evening. "Head of the new Department of Pediatric Medicine. It comes with a house on campus, security, and most importantly, access to all the university's resources. Including education for faculty families. You're offering to let us live with you?" James asked. "I'm offering to make you part of the college community. You'd be safe there, protected by university security. Anthony could audit classes, use the libraries, interact with students and faculty in a controlled environment. And I could continue my work while also protecting you both." "What's the cost?" Anthony asked. He always saw through to the practical realities. "The cost is giving up some privacy. Living on campus means being visible, being part of the academic community. People will know who you are. But they'll also know you're under the college's protection. Anyone who wants to come after you would have to go through the university administration. And Dr. Cross can't touch you. The college's board of trustees has already made it clear they support my research and my protection of you. If Cross wants to institutionalize you, he'll have to fight the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. And that's a fight he'll lose." James looked at Anthony. "What do you think?" "I think Dr. Brennan is offering us sanctuary," Anthony said. "And I think we should accept it. With gratitude." They moved to the Women's Medical College campus in March 1868. The house was modest but comfortable, with a large study where both James and Anthony could work. More importantly, it was safe. The college's security kept protesters and curiosity seekers at bay. The faculty welcomed the Caldwells, fascinated by Anthony but also respectful of his privacy. Students were warned that anyone who harassed or exploited Anthony would be expelled. For the first time since leaving Millbrook, the Caldwells could breathe. Elizabeth threw herself into her new role, building the pediatrics department while also continuing her study of Anthony's cognitive abilities. She published regular updates in medical journals, carefully documenting his development while fiercely protecting his welfare. Anthony, meanwhile, began to thrive. He audited advanced courses in medicine, mathematics, and natural sciences. Professors were initially skeptical about allowing a 7-year-old in their classrooms, but Anthony quickly proved he belonged there. Often, he understood material faster than the adult students. But more importantly, he began to make friends. Medical students who were used to being the smartest people in any room found themselves challenged by Anthony. Instead of feeling threatened, many of them were delighted. They formed study groups with him, debating theories and testing ideas. One student in particular, a young woman named Sarah Whitman, became especially close to Anthony. Sarah was 23, brilliant, and completely unconcerned with social conventions. She treated Anthony like an intellectual equal rather than a curiosity. "You know what your problem is," she told Anthony one day as they studied anatomy together. "You think too much about what other people think of you. Who cares if they're uncomfortable? You're doing work that matters. Focus on that." "Easy for you to say," Anthony replied. "People don't call you possessed. No, they just call me unnatural for wanting to be a doctor instead of a wife. We're both fighting the same battle, Anthony. The battle against people who think there's only one right way to be human." Elizabeth watched their friendship develop with quiet satisfaction. This was what she'd hoped for when she brought the Caldwells to Philadelphia. Not just safety, but community. Connection. The chance for Anthony to be more than just his extraordinary mind. Dr. Cross continued to publish attacks, continued to call for Anthony's institutionalization. But his influence was waning. The Women's Medical College stood firm in its protection of the Caldwells, and the American Philosophical Society had formally endorsed Elizabeth's research. By summer, the protests had stopped. The newspapers moved on to other stories. Life settled into something approaching normal. And Anthony Caldwell, the boy genius who'd been called possessed and dangerous, began to simply be a child. A brilliant child, yes. An exceptional child. But a child nonetheless. With a future full of possibility rather than fear. The calm lasted 6 months. In September 1868, Elizabeth received a letter from a colleague in New York, Dr. Helena Whitman, warning her that Dr. Nathan Cross had not given up his crusade against Anthony. Elizabeth. I've heard disturbing rumors. Cross has been meeting with several powerful physicians and industrialists, forming what he calls the Society for the Study of Human Excellence. Their stated goal is to identify and study exceptional individuals to understand the nature of human potential, **. But their real goal, from what I can gather, is to create a network of controlled facilities where exceptional specimens can be studied under optimal conditions. In other words, institutions where people like Anthony can be held indefinitely for research purposes, **. Cross is building political support for legislation that would allow courts to commit individuals to these facilities based solely on expert testimony about their exceptional nature. He claims it's for the good of science and society, **. Be careful. Cross is more dangerous than you realize, **. Helena. Elizabeth read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking. This was worse than she'd feared. Cross wasn't just targeting Anthony anymore. He was trying to create a system that could trap any exceptional individual. She called an emergency meeting with James, Anthony, and her closest allies at the college. Cross is planning something big, she explained, sharing the letter. He's trying to institutionalize exceptionalism itself. Create a legal framework where anyone deemed too intelligent, too talented, too different can be locked away for study. That's monstrous, Dr. Brummel said. It's using science as a weapon against the very people who could advance it. It's also perfectly legal if he can get the right legislation passed, Professor Leidy added grimly. And Cross has friends in the Pennsylvania legislature. Wealthy friends who might be interested in controlling access to exceptional minds for their own purposes. Anthony, now 8 years old and even more composed than before, spoke up. He's building a system of intellectual slavery. Instead of owning people's bodies, he wants to own their minds. Exactly, Elizabeth said. And you're his proof of concept, Anthony. If he can institutionalize you, use you to demonstrate the value of controlled study, he can justify expanding the system to others. Then we need to destroy his credibility before he can build this system, James said. Expose him for what he really is. How? Dr. Brummel asked. Cross is careful. He hides his real intentions behind scientific language and noble goals. Anthony stood and walked to the window, looking out at the college campus. We need to prove that exceptional individuals thrive when they're free, not when they're controlled. We need to demonstrate that Cross's approach would destroy the very potential he claims to want to cultivate. That's a long-term strategy, Elizabeth said. Cross is moving now. We need something immediate. What if we exposed his real motivations? Anthony turned back to the group. Dr. Brennan, you said Cross is working with industrialists. What do they want? Elizabeth thought for a moment. Industrial efficiency. New technologies. Competitive advantages in manufacturing and commerce. Then they don't want to study exceptional minds for science. They want to exploit them for profit. Anthony's eyes sharpened with understanding. If we can prove that Cross's Society for the Study of Human Excellence is really just a scheme to create a captive labor force of brilliant people who can be forced to solve problems for wealthy industrialists, we destroy his credibility completely. That's brilliant, Professor Leidy said. But how do we prove it? We infiltrate his organization, Anthony said simply. We pretend to be interested in his research. We get close enough to see what he's really doing. You can't infiltrate anything, James said firmly. You're 8 years old and his primary target. But I could, Dr. Brummel said slowly. I'm a respected physician. I have conservative credentials. If I approached Cross and expressed interest in his work, claimed to be concerned about the dangers of uncontrolled exceptional intelligence, he might let me in. Elizabeth felt her stomach tighten. That's dangerous, Anna. If Cross suspects you're a spy, then I'll be careful. But Anthony's right. This is the only way to stop Cross before he builds something we can't tear down. The group debated for hours, weighing risks and strategies. Finally, they agreed on a plan. Dr. Brummel would approach Cross, expressing concern about Anthony's influence on her students at the Women's Medical College. She'd claim to believe that such exceptional intelligence needed professional supervision and would ask to join his Society for the Study of Human Excellence. Once inside, she'd gather evidence of Cross's real intentions and report back. It was risky. But it was their best chance. Dr. Brummel met with Cross 3 days later at his private research facility on the outskirts of Philadelphia. The facility was larger than she'd expected, a sprawling 3-story building that had once been a tuberculosis sanitarium. Cross had converted it into what he called a laboratory for human potential. He gave her a tour, and what she saw made her blood run cold. The first floor housed luxurious apartments where research subjects lived. But the doors locked from the outside. The windows were barred. And the residents, about a dozen people ranging in age from 12 to 30, all had the same haunted look in their eyes. These are some of our most promising subjects, Cross explained proudly. Mathematicians, inventors, artists. All exceptional in their fields. All struggling to function in normal society. We provide them structure, purpose, and the resources to maximize their potential. They're prisoners, Dr. Brummel said, barely hiding her horror. They're patients, Cross corrected. Voluntary patients who recognize they need supervision to protect themselves and society. Voluntary? They signed committal papers. Legal and binding. Dr. Brummel looked at a young woman working on complex mathematical equations, her hands shaking slightly. And if they want to leave? Their conditions make them a danger to themselves. We can't release them until we're confident they're stable. Cross smiled. But most of them come to appreciate what we offer. Purpose, community, the chance to use their gifts without the complications of normal life. Dr. Brummel followed Cross to the second floor, where he showed her laboratories equipped with the latest scientific instruments. Here, the residents worked on problems provided by Cross's industrial partners. Mr. Patterson here is designing a new type of textile loom, Cross said, gesturing to a man hunched over technical drawings. His innovations will revolutionize the industry. And he's grateful for the opportunity to work without distractions. Patterson didn't look grateful. He looked exhausted and defeated. The third floor was the worst. Cross called it the observation wing, but it was clearly a prison. Small cells with locked doors, observation windows, and detailed charts documenting every aspect of the residents' behavior. This is where we house subjects who are resistant to treatment, Cross explained. Exceptional individuals whose gifts have made them dangerously unstable. They require constant supervision until we can bring their abilities under control. Dr. Brummel saw a teenage boy in one cell, rocking back and forth, his eyes empty. She saw an elderly woman in another, solving mathematical puzzles compulsively, her fingers bleeding from writing so much. These weren't patients. They were victims. Dr. Cross, she said carefully, this is impressive work. But I'm concerned about the legal implications. These people are being held against their will. Not at all. They're being protected. Society doesn't understand exceptional intelligence, Dr. Brummel. It fears it, persecutes it. We're providing sanctuary while also advancing human knowledge. It's a perfect arrangement. For whom? Cross's eyes narrowed slightly. For everyone involved. The subjects get care and purpose. Industry gets innovation. Science gets data. And society is protected from potentially dangerous anomalies. Dr. Brummel realized she'd pushed too hard. She softened her tone. Of course. I see the value now. How does one join your society officially? There's an induction ceremony next week. You'd be most welcome. Cross led her back to the first floor. But I must ask, Dr. Brummel, what changed your mind about exceptional intelligence? You've been quite supportive of the Caldwell boy. I've been observing him at the college, Dr. Brummel lied smoothly. His influence on the students is troubling. They defer to him, rely on him, stop thinking for themselves. I've come to believe that such concentrated intelligence needs professional management. For everyone's benefit. Cross smiled. I knew you'd come around eventually. Intelligent people always do. Dr. Brummel left the facility feeling sick. She'd seen enough to know that Cross's operation was even worse than they'd feared. He wasn't just planning to institutionalize exceptional people. He was already doing it. And he was making a fortune from it, selling the innovations his captive subjects produced to the highest bidder. She reported everything to Elizabeth and the others that evening. We have to expose this, James said, pacing the room. Those people are being held as slaves. It's unconscionable. We need proof that will stand up in court, Elizabeth said. Testimony from the victims, documents showing Cross's financial arrangements with industrialists, evidence that the committal papers were signed under duress. I can get some of that at the induction ceremony, Dr. Brummel offered. Cross seems confident that new members will be impressed rather than horrified. He'll likely share more details about his arrangements. It's too dangerous, Elizabeth argued. If he suspects you. He won't. I've convinced him I'm sympathetic to his cause. Dr. Brummel's expression was determined. This is happening now, Elizabeth. We can't wait for a safer opportunity. Those people need help. Anthony had been listening quietly. Now he spoke. Dr. Brummel is right. We have to act. But she shouldn't go alone. She needs backup. Someone who can document what she finds. I'll go with her, Elizabeth said immediately. No, Anthony said. You're too recognizable as my defender. Cross would never trust you. But there's someone he might trust. Someone young, ambitious, looking to make a name in medicine. Someone he'd see as a potential protege rather than a threat. Everyone looked at him. Sarah Whitman, Anthony said. She could pose as a medical student interested in Cross's work. Young enough to be moldable, smart enough to be useful. He'd want to recruit her. Elizabeth's stomach clenched. Sarah was 24 now, brilliant, and brave. But sending her into Cross's facility felt like sending a lamb to slaughter. "I'll ask her," Elizabeth said. "But only if she volunteers. I won't order anyone into danger." Sarah volunteered immediately. "That monster is holding people prisoner and exploiting them," she said when Elizabeth explained the situation. "Of course I'm going to help stop him." They spent 3 days preparing. Sarah studied Cross's published work, memorized details about his theories, practiced expressing admiration for his approach. She was a natural actress, able to project exactly the kind of eager ambition that would appeal to Cross. The induction ceremony was held at Cross's facility on a Saturday evening. Dr. Brummel arrived with Sarah, introducing her as a promising young physician interested in the study of exceptional cognition. Cross was immediately interested. "Miss Whitman, I've heard about your work at the Women's Medical College. Impressive for someone so young. Tell me, what draws you to the study of exceptional intelligence?" "Curiosity, mainly," Sarah said, playing her role perfectly. "I've observed Anthony Caldwell at the college, and I'm fascinated by how his mind works. But I'm also troubled by how disruptive his presence is. He makes normal students feel inadequate. He challenges professors inappropriately. I think he needs more structured guidance." Cross smiled. "Exactly my assessment. Exceptional intelligence requires firm management. Left unchecked, it becomes dangerous to both the individual and society." The ceremony was attended by about 30 people, a mix of physicians, industrialists, and politicians. Cross gave a speech about the importance of controlling exceptional minds for the greater good. Then he showed them the facility. Sarah watched everything with careful attention, memorizing details. She saw the locked doors, the observation windows, the charts documenting every aspect of the residents' lives. She saw the despair in their eyes. But she also saw something else. Documents on Cross's desk showing payment agreements with manufacturing companies. Correspondence with legislators about proposed laws that would make it easier to commit exceptional anomalies to institutions. And most damning, a ledger showing how much money Cross had made from selling his captive subjects' innovations. Sarah needed to get evidence. Physical proof they could take to court. She waited until Cross was distracted, showing other new members the third-floor observation wing. Then she slipped into his office. The documents were right there on his desk, almost as if Cross was so confident in his power that he didn't bother hiding them. Sarah pulled out a small camera Elizabeth had given her, a new invention that could capture images on treated paper. She photographed page after page of incriminating documents, her hands shaking. She'd almost finished when she heard footsteps. Someone was coming. Sarah shoved the camera into her bag and grabbed a medical journal from Cross's desk, pretending to be reading. The door opened. Cross stood there, his expression suspicious. "Miss Whitman. What are you doing in my office?" "I'm sorry, Dr. Cross. I was looking for the ladies' room and got turned around. I found this journal and started reading. Your work is fascinating." Cross studied her for a long moment. Sarah forced herself to stay calm, to meet his eyes without flinching. Finally, he smiled. "Of course. The facilities are down the hall to the left. And Miss Whitman? Don't wander off again. This is a secure facility for a reason." "I understand, sir." Sarah left the office on shaking legs. She'd gotten the evidence. Now she just had to get out alive. The evidence Sarah and Dr. Brummel gathered was explosive. Photographs of Cross's ledgers showing payments from industrialists for innovations produced by his captive subjects. Copies of correspondence with legislators about laws that would make institutionalizing exceptional people easier. Testimony from Dr. Brummel about the conditions she'd observed. Most damning were the committal papers. Sarah had managed to photograph several of them, and they told a horrifying story. People signed over to Cross's care by family members who found them troublesome or inconvenient. Signatures obtained under duress or from individuals who were mentally impaired. One committal paper was for a 14-year-old girl whose only crime was being better at mathematics than her teachers. Elizabeth compiled everything into a comprehensive report and took it to the district attorney's office. The DA, a man named Thomas Morrison, listened to her presentation with growing concern. "Dr. Brennan, these are serious allegations. If true, Dr. Cross has committed fraud, false imprisonment, and possibly human trafficking. They're true. I have documented evidence and multiple witnesses. Then why come to me? Why not go directly to the newspapers? Because I want justice, not just scandal. I want those people freed and I want Cross prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Can you help me?" Morrison studied the evidence carefully. "I can investigate. But Cross is powerful, Dr. Brennan. He has friends in high places. This won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is." Morrison launched a formal investigation. He sent deputies to inspect Cross's facility. They found exactly what Dr. Brummel had described: imprisoned people being held under false pretenses and exploited for profit. The newspapers got hold of the story within days. Headlines screamed about the doctor who imprisoned geniuses and the factory of captive minds. Public opinion turned against Cross overnight. The same people who'd supported his calls to institutionalize Anthony now demanded he be arrested. Cross fought back desperately. He claimed his subjects were voluntary patients. He produced the committal papers as proof. He argued that he was being persecuted for doing necessary work that society was too squeamish to appreciate. But the evidence was overwhelming. Victims came forward, telling stories of coercion and abuse. Family members admitted they'd signed committal papers under pressure from Cross, who'd convinced them their exceptional relatives were dangerous. The trial began in November 1868. Elizabeth was the prosecution's star witness. She presented the evidence systematically, showing the court exactly how Cross's operation worked. Dr. Cross claims he was providing care for exceptional individuals, Elizabeth testified. But the evidence shows he was running a for-profit prison where brilliant people were exploited for their innovations. He made hundreds of thousands of dollars selling inventions and solutions produced by people who had no legal right to refuse his demands. Cross's defense attorney tried to discredit her, suggesting she was biased because of her relationship with Anthony. "Isn't it true, Dr. Brennan, that you have a personal interest in this case? That you want Dr. Cross destroyed because he challenged your protection of Anthony Caldwell?" "My interest is in protecting vulnerable people from exploitation," Elizabeth responded calmly. "Whether that's Anthony or the dozens of victims Dr. Cross imprisoned." The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty on all counts. Dr. Nathan Cross was sentenced to 15 years in prison. His facility was shut down, and all his subjects were released. Many of them required extensive medical and psychological care to recover from their ordeal. But they were free. In the aftermath, Elizabeth worked with the district attorney's office to create new legislation protecting exceptional individuals from involuntary institutionalization. The laws they drafted required multiple expert opinions, judicial oversight, and regular reviews before anyone could be committed based on exceptional abilities. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Anthony, now 9 years old, watched these developments with interest. "You changed the law," he told Elizabeth one evening as they sat in her study. "You made it harder for people like Cross to hurt people like me." "We made it harder," Elizabeth corrected. "This was your idea, Anthony. You saw the pattern, understood the threat, and helped us stop it. I just pointed out what was obvious." "What was obvious to you?" "Most people didn't see what Cross was really doing until it was too late." Anthony was quiet for a moment. "Dr. Brennan, I've been thinking about my future. About what I want to do with my abilities. And I want to study medicine. Become a doctor like you and Father." But I also want to study law. Because changing laws is sometimes more important than healing individuals. Laws protect everyone. Elizabeth smiled. You're 9 years old, Anthony. You have time to figure out your path. I know what my path is. I just need to prepare for it. He looked at her with those remarkable eyes. I'm going to spend my life protecting people who are different. People who don't fit society's expectations. Because if someone like you hadn't protected me, I'd either be dead or locked in Cross's facility. You would have found a way to survive. Maybe. But I shouldn't have had to just survive. I should have been able to thrive from the beginning. Every exceptional person should. Anthony's voice was passionate now, more emotional than she'd ever heard him. Cross is in prison, but the attitudes that allowed him to operate are still out there. People still fear intelligence, difference, anything that challenges their understanding of normal. I'm going to change that. Somehow. Elizabeth felt tears in her eyes. This brilliant child had become a brilliant young man with a purpose that went beyond his own survival. Then I'll help you, she said. For as long as you need me. Epilogue, 1899. Dr. Anthony Caldwell stood at the podium in the grand auditorium of Johns Hopkins University, looking out at an audience of America's leading physicians, scientists, and legal scholars. He was 40 years old now, with silver beginning to show in his dark hair and lines around those still remarkable blue eyes. He held degrees in medicine, law, and psychology. He'd published groundbreaking work on cognitive development and human potential. He'd argued cases before the Supreme Court defending the rights of exceptional individuals. And he was about to give the most important speech of his life. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, 32 years ago, I stood before the American Philosophical Society as a 7-year-old child, defending my right to exist outside an institution. I was called possessed, dangerous, unnatural. People wanted to lock me away for the crime of being different. He paused, letting the words sink in. Today, I stand before you as proof that exceptional intelligence is not a disease to be cured or a threat to be contained. It is a natural variation in human cognition that, when nurtured rather than feared, can contribute enormously to human progress. He spent the next hour presenting his proposal, a network of educational institutions specifically designed for exceptional children. Not institutions to imprison them, but schools to nurture them. Places where brilliant young minds could learn from expert teachers while also maintaining connections to their families and communities. We've spent too long trying to make exceptional children fit into systems designed for average intelligence, Anthony said. Instead, we should create systems that allow all children, regardless of their cognitive abilities, to reach their full potential. Not separate and isolated, but integrated and supported. The proposal was ambitious. It would require funding, legislative support, and a fundamental shift in how society viewed intelligence and education. But Anthony had learned from Elizabeth Brennan that one person, willing to stand up and fight, could change the world. And he wasn't alone anymore. In the audience sat Dr. Sarah Whitman Caldwell, his wife of 10 years. Beside her was Dr. James Caldwell, now 70, still practicing medicine and still supporting his son's crusade for justice. And in the front row, though she'd been dead for 5 years, Anthony felt the presence of Dr. Elizabeth Brennan. The woman who'd bought him at an auction, not to own him but to free him. Who'd risked everything to protect him. Who'd taught him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. The audience voted overwhelmingly to support his proposal. Within 5 years, the first school for exceptional children opened in Philadelphia. It was named the Elizabeth Brennan Academy. By 1920, there were 20 such schools across America. By 1950, over 100. The children who attended them went on to become scientists, inventors, artists, and leaders. They contributed discoveries, innovations, and ideas that advanced human knowledge in countless ways. And none of them had to flee their homes or hide their abilities or live in fear of being called possessed. Because Anthony Caldwell, the boy with the shining eyes who defied science, had spent his life building a better world. Not through brilliance alone, but through brilliance combined with compassion, courage, and an unwavering belief that every person deserved the chance to reach their potential. He'd been called impossible, unnatural, a mystery that defied explanation. But the truth was simpler and more profound. He was human. Exceptionally human. And he'd proven that exceptional humanity, when protected and nurtured, could change everything.